Welcome everyone to the July meeting of the ASU Digital Accessibility Liaisons. Whether you're a liaison or not, we love to have people here at these trainings. And today, I'm sorry, Don, I just forgot your last name.
Oh,
Dan
Tuleta.
Tuleta
Yeah.
is from Equidox, and you will all be happy to know, and you're the first people to get this announcement. We have a license now with Equidox, and it will be free to all faculty and staff. If you follow that link in the Slack announcement, you can. Uh, it's just a simple little request to get Equidox, and then you'll be able to sign in with your ASU rate. Or you can go to the page on the accessibility site. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dan.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So this is Equidox. It's a PDF remediation tool. Think of it almost as like a replacement, or in some extreme cases, like an augment to Adobe Acrobat for PDF remediation. So it's a tool that we're using to tag documents and make them accessible for primarily assistive technology, like a screen reader, for example. So anyone that's somewhat new to PDF accessibility and remediation, PDFs are kind of challenging from an accessibility perspective because they are all unique in their own ways. They're not like there's not like one uniform way of creating a PDF document. They can really come from anywhere. Thousands of different platforms can design documents and be saved as a PDF. So there's just an infinite combination of variables out there that make these documents. And so every PDF is kind of like solving a little bit of a puzzle. So that's what makes PDF remediation kind of challenging and fun, because you have to kind of be dynamic in how you approach different pages, calling for different things just because of the nature of the content on those pages. So this training today is kind of aimed at just giving you a baseline foundational understanding of how to use Equidox and how to kind of remediate the core elements that you're going to find in most PDF documents. So what I'll do first here is I'll just mention that it is a web-based application. So you can see I'm operating right in my browser. Being a browser-based application, it means that there's really like no limitation to where I'm working from as long as I have an internet connection. So really any computer, you don't have to install or update or maintain software on any machine. It's totally flexible in terms of where you're working from. We also work on a concurrent licensing model. We don't need to really talk about that, but I just want to mention that if you are using a browser, we do recommend using Google Chrome. Most people, I feel like, use Chrome just like naturally. But if you don't, I'd say my second choice would be Microsoft Edge, but first choice would be Google Chrome. It's hosted on the Google Cloud platform, so some of the components of the architecture are kind of just like optimized to work best in that Chrome environment. So you'll have the overall like best experience with Chrome. But again, if you use like Microsoft Edge, that's okay too. What I'll do first here is I'll go to the Import Documents tab on the left-hand side. When I go to the Import Document screen, it's going to bring me to this view. And from here, I can open up the folders on my hard drive. Or if I already have my folders open, like I do in this case, I can also just like drag and drop some documents into this rectangular area. When I drop those documents into that rectangular area, these check marks that are kind of appearing and disappearing, those are just indicating that the documents have uploaded to the cloud. And now that they're up in the cloud, they are in a format where Equidox is able to import them. So the import process is when some of the magic starts to happen. Equidox, during this import, is going to look for a few things in these documents. It's going to look for things like existing tag structure, if there is any. Sometimes documents will have existing tags, sometimes they won't. It's always case by case with PDFs, depending on a number of variables. But if the document has tags, you're able to kind of use what's already there and manipulate it and make some adjustments if you want to. I do find that a lot of times existing tag structure is so poor that it's almost like not even worth trying to untangle the mess. You might choose to just like start over from scratch using Equidox, and that's always an option that you have. And I can show you how to do that when we get into one of these documents to work on them. The other option is that sometimes documents aren't tagged at all, and that's a very common thing. Documents coming from their source file, whether it be like Google Docs or InDesign or Canva or something, depending on a number of settings that you have applied. Sometimes you export a document and there's no tag structure whatsoever. That's okay too. During the import process, Equidox kind of effectively runs like an auto tagging process. It's going to automatically locate the encoded text, the images, the hyperlinks, fillable form fields if there are any. Different elements will be found on import so that in theory you have less work to do as a remediator when you're going through the document page by page. So these are the documents that I just imported. I think I imported like 4 of them. So these are now like available up here. The 5 most recent documents that you've interacted with will be available at the top. All of your other documents will start to populate down below. And you're free to like kind of, search and go back in time and look for old stuff if you need to. There's like a pretty straightforward, self-explanatory searching and filtering system here. So if you're looking for a document that you were working on 6 months ago or something, you can use these like filter features. I'll start with this document here. This is a very simple document, just like on its face, but there are a lot of things to kind of talk about just to kind of establish like a good foundational understanding of how to use Equidox. So this is like a simple document that, doesn't look very intimidating, looks pretty easy to remediate, but it will give you a good sort of introduction to how to navigate Equidox and how to do some of those basic things that will be applied to virtually every document you'll ever work on. So it's a good place to start and just kind of get a feel for what we're doing here. So this document is 2 pages. I have a thumbnail for each of the 2 pages, and you can click on the thumbnail and go directly to either page. So if you wanted to jump to a random page, you can click on it. You also have a searching feature here. Now, I just mentioned this, like it's not useful on a 2-page document, but if you have 200 pages and you want to go to like page 193, you can just type that number in and go there. You don't have to scroll through hundreds of thumbnails. So that's what that go to page feature is for. You have buttons here to export it back to a PDF whenever you're ready to do so. We're not quite ready to do that yet, but if you ever wanted to do like a quick import export, you can do so. There's a button right there for it. You can share the document. So keep in mind, being web-based, Equidox is naturally collaborative. So you can actually share documents with your colleagues. Maybe you need like subject matter expertise to help with like the alt text on the images, or maybe you just have an extremely long and complicated document where you want to make sure that you're meeting your deadlines. And so you share the document with your coworkers and say, hey, I'll take pages 1 through 50, you do 51 through 100, and we can get this document done in half the time. In theory, you can have multiple people working on the same document at the same time even. So sharing a document is pretty straightforward. You would just choose from the drop-down menu which user you'd like to share with or which group of users if you have groups created. So if you have like a small like subset of users and you want to share it with all 10 of those users at once, you can share it with the entire group. That's more of an administrator feature though, so we won't go too in depth on that, but sharing is always a capability that every user will have. We can delete the document. Now, the only reason I mentioned delete is that you don't have to delete anything out of Equidox. Don't feel like pressured to like worry about like data limitations. There's no maximum number of PDFs or pages or anything like that. You can have truly unlimited use of Equidox. So don't feel like you need to delete everything right away. But if you want to delete duplicates or get rid of stuff that's a year old or something, feel free to go through and delete documents at your leisure. Down below, there are some properties of the document. Now, I always like to mention these because they are so often overlooked, but they're actually really important. So I don't like to just kind of, gloss over them, because if you ever run an accessibility checker, maybe it's like Adobe Acrobat, for example, or the pack checker, like those are 2 very common tools that are used for checking document accessibility. A lot of times documents will fail for not having a document title. I would say like a good percentage of documents, at least half, maybe 75% of documents that I see don't have a document title set. This document is no different. If I were to open up this document, like in Adobe Acrobat, what I would find is that there's, first of all, no tags. So no tags available. And if you were to run the accessibility checker, which again, a lot of people do just kind of as like a starting point, it lights up like a Christmas tree with all kinds of issues because again, there's no tags. So everything is going to fail. So this is what I expected. But one thing I did want to mention is that this document doesn't have a title. So that's one of the properties that fails. It's one of the very first properties that gets checked. So what Equidox does in the event that your document doesn't have a title is it will just take the file name and it will plug it into the title field for you. Now, this is better than nothing because at least we're not leaving the title field blank and we won't get that failure when we export the document. But this is a perfect example of when a file name does not necessarily make a good document title. The document title is pretty much the first introduction that a screen reader user will have with a PDF document. So as they're like navigating through the LMS or a database of documents or a website that has, 50 PDFs linked on it, as they're like going through those links or those documents, their first interaction is the document title. And so it really needs to be like clear and concise, plain language to describe what this document is all about. And remember, they're hearing it through a screen reader. So EQ PDF training sample file and then a bunch of numbers all smushed together as one giant word. That sounds like a train wreck through a screen reader. You don't want to have like a bunch of abbreviations and acronyms and words just joined together. Like this might make sense as like a naming convention for your file names to kind of organize your hard drive or whatever. But to a screen reader user, this is pretty much unusable. So I would want to clean this up. I would want to like actually phonetically spell these words out. Like, at least go like PDF training sample file and then maybe get rid of like this random serial number at the end unless it had like a specific meaning. That's a much better document title because anyone using a screen reader at least now knows like the general topic of this document. They're not just hearing a bunch of gibberish and having to open it up to then figure out what it actually is. You can add an author to the document if you want. I could like put my name in if I felt like it, or if you have like like a department that you want to put as an author or something like that. It's not a requirement for accessibility. You'll note like on the accessibility checker here, there's nothing failing for like lack of author. It's not a property that's required inside of the like WCAG guidelines, but it is a good search term. So for like SEO purposes, it never hurts to add an author to your document. I wouldn't just plug in any random old name, but if you know like who the author is, or you have like some sort of like department policy on how you want to set authors, that's where you can add one. You can also change the language attribute. So this is another important property. A lot of documents, depending on where they come from and how old they are, they might not have a language attribute set. So what we do is we set it to English for you. Just the assumption being that your document is probably written in English. Most documents that flow through Equidox are in English, but of course there's exceptions to that. You could have, foreign exchange students that are coming in and they get like info packets provided in different languages, or maybe you have like foreign language classes and you have all kinds of, coursework that's in different languages. You can choose the appropriate language from this drop-down menu to set the language attribute. Now, I often get asked this, but Equidox is not like it's not like a translation tool. We're not here to convert this English document into Lithuanian. That's just not what this is. That's not at all what we're here to do. We're here to like make sure that the language attribute is set. So in the event that you had a Lithuanian document, you would have a Lithuanian voice reading that document so that the Lithuanian speaker on the other end, or the reader on the other end, is going to hear this properly. They're not going to have an English screen reader sounding very silly trying to pronounce Lithuanian words. So it's a critical sort of property that can't be overlooked, but it's going to be set to English for you by default. So probably 95% of the time you won't even have to worry about it. But if you have anything that changes, Spanish, French, German, Arabic, whatever, you want to make sure that you are adjusting it in that drop-down menu. I'll save my property since I made changes to my title and I added an author, and then I'm ready to jump into the first page. So I'll jump into page 1 here by just clicking on the thumbnail for it. And when I'm inside of Equidox, the first thing that I kind of notice are these yellow rectangles that are covering up the content suddenly. These yellow rectangles are what we refer to as reading zones, and reading zones are essentially the same thing as tags. These will create the tag structure when we export the document. So we are using these reading zones to make sure that all of the content here is organized and collected in a way that's going to make sense for someone that can't visually see like the layout of this PDF, but they're hearing it through their screen reader. So we will make a few adjustments to these zones. Now, there's obviously a whole bunch of buttons on the page here, and it might look a little bit intimidating if you're seeing this for the very first time. I just want to call out a few things here to hopefully like kind of minimize that like initial shock factor of seeing this brand new interface. So just so that you're aware, this second menu here, like the second layer to this top menu, all of these buttons, they're also available on the left-hand side. They're just in two locations. Now, the reason we did this is when we came out with a new user interface a couple of years ago, and part of it was to make the interface more accessible. So someone that might be using a keyboard and assistive technology to navigate the interface itself, having some of these like critical functions in a fixed location at the top of the page makes it easier for them to access with their keyboard rather than having to like scroll over here on this left-hand panel where there's just a limitation of space. So all of these buttons are actually duplicate buttons. I typically hit this little toggle switch to hide that menu because I'm using my mouse and I'm also using a small laptop screen. So I prefer to have like that extra inch or so of vertical space on my screen so that I can see more of the PDF. To me, that's more valuable than seeing that second menu because all of those options, they're also available over here. I just have to quickly scroll for it. But again, it's a total preference. It's just what I prefer. If you want to look at both menus, you're more than welcome to. You're not losing any functionality by hiding that menu. It just gives a little bit of a cleaner look to the interface. On the right-hand side, it's just thumbnails of the different pages. In general, you typically are going to collapse that just to get it out of the way. But if you need to like scroll forward in the document, maybe you want to find a page that's coming up, you can always just hide that menu or expand it whenever you need to like jump around. So I usually hide it, but it's up to you. Okay, now left to right across the top, there's some buttons here that are really important that I'll mention. We have arrows here to take you from page to page. That's pretty obvious, but just so you're aware, you can go from page to page with those arrows. You can also search for a specific page, just like we did like from the document detail view. You can jump ahead if you want to go to like page 150. You can just type that in and go to it. When you go to the next page, Equidox will remind you to save your work. So there is a manual save button right here. So if you get into the habit of like hitting that save button, then you won't have to worry so much about the prompts. But if you were to like make changes to this page and try to jump to another page, it's going to remind you, hey, save your work. The reason we do that, we save at the page level inside of Equidox because it is browser based and everyone has got a horror story of online shopping and you're just about to check out and your browser freezes, or you're trying to buy tickets to the Taylor Swift concert and everything freezes up because it's overloaded and you got too many YouTube tabs open. And everyone's had those types of issues with browsers. You hit the wrong X because you got 50 tabs open on your browser window. So who knows what could happen in a browser-based application. We don't ever want you to lose like hours worth of work. So you're always saving at the page level. So even if your browser were to crash or your laptop dies or whatever might happen, you can just log back in, reboot your computer, log back in, and everything will be restored for you. So just keep that in mind. You're always saving at the page level with Equidox. Next to the searching or navigating pages, there's this little slider tool. It's the sensitivity slider. I don't really need to use it on this page. But what it's for, it's really important. It's meant to kind of detect the granularity of the content on the page. So if you can tell, like the number of zones that we have on the page right now, it's pretty much spot on. We don't really need to make any adjustments to them. Equidox gave us a pretty good starting point just by importing the document. But if I didn't like my starting point, I can just like move this slider around and just see if there's like other options for me. Now, I'm not going to find anything better than what I had, but it's important to know that you have this functionality up here because this is a way of kind of, if you don't like the initial starting point that you got, or if you have a document that was very poorly tagged, a document where you import it, there was existing tag structure, you open it up in Equidox and the reading zones are just like a complete disaster, just move the slider to like reset the page and it will simplify things for you. And just move it around until you find kind of that optimal starting point. Usually it'll be somewhere like in the middle of the spectrum here. I don't usually find myself way over to the right or way over to the left. It's usually somewhere in the middle. But of course, there's always outliers. So you have 20 different settings that you can apply. And you're just looking for the one that's going to give you like the correct number of zones and roughly the right size of zones so that you don't have to make as many adjustments to the individual zones themselves.
Hey, Dan,
Yep.
we just had a question about what are zones? Can you give us a definition of what those are?
Zones are basically the same thing as tags. So they are organizing the content. So these are the zones that are wrapping up the different elements on the page. They're going to collect the paragraphs, the lists, the tables, the hyperlinks, the footnotes, the different elements on a PDF. They need to have a different tag type so that they can work in a different way with a screen reader. And these reading zones are going to establish those tag types when we export the document. So think of them as tags if you have an Adobe Acrobat background. These zones are just going to become tags when we export the PDF. So we just need to make sure that everything is kind of labeled with the correct zone type and that all of these zones are going to be read in the correct order so that this page is read in a logical way.
So, would you say that each paragraph is a zone, or is that just it? I mean, you're talking about chunking content. So, like if I had two paragraphs that were under why do we use it, would those both paragraphs be a zone?
Well, you want to find a balance. So the whole point of having different zones or different tags is for navigation purposes.
Mhm.
So let's do this. If I were to drag my slider way over to the right, I get these much larger kind of like 10,000 foot view of the page zones. All of the content on the page is inside of a zone. All of the content on the page would be read out loud. There's a button right here that looks like a computer monitor. When you press this button, it will open up a separate tab in your browser and it gives you this HTML rendering of the page that you're working on. So this HTML, it basically shows you in a simple like linear format, how will this page be read according to how those zones are currently set up. So one thing that like you might notice right away is like all of the headings are combined with their paragraphs. So they're all just going to be read as like a big long seamless paragraph instead of them being broken up. Here's a big problem down here. That two column section at the bottom of the page, if we were to just leave it alone right now, the screen reader would read clear across this column split. So now the screen reader is just reading a bunch of gibberish because it's a bunch of fragmented sentences that aren't even in the same paragraph, but that's the order in which it's all going to be read. So you need to find that proper setting, something more like, I don't know, like this, where if you go back to your preview, now you're going to have more zones on the page, but it allows you to kind of break them up into the granularity that you need, where you want to be able to set these as headings, where you can set the appropriate reading order so that these paragraphs and the headings, they don't get all like consolidated together. So you're looking for like the balance. Now, if you have, if you have like two paragraphs and it's like single spacing and it's like super tight and those two paragraphs just get like grouped together as one big paragraph, that's not like the end of the world. You're not like ruining the document because of that. You're not going to get like, you're not going to get a lawsuit over something like that. It's just a minor oversight. Where you run into trouble is where you just say like you put a giant zone over the entire page and you just say good luck, like everything will be read, so it's good enough. And that's not the case. You want to make sure that you are like breaking these out into smaller groups so that a screen reader user can properly navigate through these paragraphs and know exactly like what heading level that they're associated with. So that's what we're here to do, to kind of collect and organize the information on the page so that a user can navigate this the same way that a sighted user, if they just wanted to read like where does it come from, they can immediately with their eyes find that on the page and read the corresponding paragraph. If everything is just one giant zone or one giant paragraph, then you're telling the screen reader user that they have to read every single word on this page and just figure it out from there because they have no ability to navigate within that zone.
I see. So it's a relational thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. So if I had a second paragraph under why do we use it, that would be marked as a paragraph. If I had a list under why do we use it as well, then that would be a separate chunk. I
Yeah,
don't.
exactly. The list would be different. A list would have a list zone type. Right now, all of the zones on this page, in the upper left-hand corner, there's a little green flag. It says TX, and it stands for text. So, like, because this document was untagged to begin with, everything is just noticed as text because even though this is like bold and and big at the middle at the top of the first page, a screen reader doesn't really care about that. Sometimes font is just big and bold for the sake of being big and bold. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a heading. It's my job as a remediator to make sure that I'm identifying this as a heading so that from an accessibility standpoint, the person that relies on that heading structure can use it for their navigation throughout the document. So right now we have nothing but text on this page.
Mm.
And that's what those little green flags in the upper left corner, that's kind of like the generic, like default zone type. That's going to be your most popular zone type is text. But there are exceptions to that. There are headings, there are lists, there are tables, there are footnotes, there are hyperlinks. There's different types of zones that you need to apply to the appropriate content groups.
Excellent. Thank you.
No problem. And then the upper right-hand corner of zones, just while we're at it, those have little numbers indicating the reading order. So the reading order, I would argue, is like the most important part of PDF accessibility. If you do nothing else to a document, make sure that the content is reading in the correct order. Because even if everything is perfectly tagged, like everything is labeled with the correct zone type or the correct tag type, if the content is reading out of order, then it can render the entire document nothing but a bunch of misinformation. So the reading order is just absolutely critical. Again, I would say it's the most important part of what we're doing. There's, of course, other important things that you need to consider. But if I were to just boil PDF remediation down to if only one thing could be done, I would vote for reading order. Now, the reading order button, there's like a reading order thing up here where it's set to, by default, one column. So really all one column means is left to right, top to bottom. So you'll notice that like the reading zones right now are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So we have to clean up the reading order as we go. So we'll fix that in just a moment. But you can change your reading order to different column options as well. But you just have to hit the reorder button whenever you want to reset the order for the page. Now, again, we will set it by default to that like left to right, top to bottom flow, which is probably like the average document will have a left to right, top to bottom reading order. But there are, of course, exceptions to that. So you need to kind of address those case by case. So we called out the preview button. There's like zoom in and zoom out buttons here. Those are pretty obvious and self-explanatory. Just kind of depends on your preference and how big your monitor is. You might want to zoom way in or zoom out a bit. There's a lowercase I button here, which is a menu of keyboard shortcuts. Now, don't worry about like memorizing these. I don't even have them all memorized, but there are a handful of them here that I use very frequently, and they're pretty intuitive. Like once you use Equidox for an hour, like they're just going to kind of naturally stick in your mind. And I'll call them out when I'm using keyboard shortcuts today. They just kind of help you minimize like the distance your mouse has to travel and how many drop down menus and like scrolling around you have to do. So you'll get the hang of it after a little bit of using them. And I'll mention when I am using a keyboard shortcut today. I'll cover some of these other buttons in just a minute, but we'll get into actually making changes to the PDF now. So right now, like I said, everything on this HTML preview, it's like what you see is what you get. If we were to just give up on this document and export it, everything on this page would be read out loud. And this is a heck of a lot better than having like an untagged document. But there's a couple of flaws with this document, the way that it's currently zoned. First and foremost, heading structure. Now, along with reading order, like being number like one most important, I would say heading structure, in my opinion, would be like number 2 for most important because it allows for navigation of a document. Now, this is a small document. It's only 2 pages, so in general, like someone that's going to read this with a screen reader, it's probably going to start at the very first page and read through it, and they're going to be moving on with their day in probably under a minute because screen readers read very, very quickly. If you've never witnessed anyone using a screen reader, people that rely on them every day, they have like a trained ear for it. And they usually have their speed turned up to, at least 10 times the pace at which I'm speaking right now. It's pretty impressive that they can kind of read that quickly. So a 2-page document, okay, if you forgot to set headings, like not the end of the world, but I highly recommend always paying attention to heading structure. It's a very important part of this because think of like a 200-page document. If the section of information that user is trying to get to, like they're looking for something specific within that annual report, maybe that section of information starts on page 164. Well, if they need to go find that, the heading structure is probably their like first method of locating that specific section of data. If they don't have heading structure, you're kind of just telling them that like, hey, start at page one and just read this whole document until you eventually find what you're looking for. And if that's 164 pages later, you're talking about like telling them to like literally spend an hour or 2 hours reading this entire document when they just wanted to hear one specific piece of info that they couldn't find because there was no heading structure. So can't overemphasize how important headings are. Um,
Can I ask you a
yep.
question? That's because as a screen reader user, I'm able to hit a keyboard shortcut and like I can get all the headings, a list
Mhm.
of all the headings. So I can use that sort of to mentally map the page and then jump to where I want to go. Is that correct?
Exactly. And not even just the page, the entire document as a whole. So think of the heading structure as like an outline of the document. You're just kind of getting like the high level details of the different sections, but it's almost in like an outline format where you can just drill down to the specific area of what you're looking for and then kind of expand all of the more detailed information from that point on. So a good way to kind of visualize it is like if you had if you had like a textbook, the title of the textbook on the cover page would be your heading level one. The individual chapter titles, let's say there's 20 chapters, all 20 of those heading chapter titles would be heading level twos. And then within each of those chapters, there's going to be sections and subsections and subsections. So those would be your heading levels three, four, five. You kind of max out at heading level six. It's kind of it's a rule that you really don't go deeper than heading level six. It's rare to find a document that does need to go deeper than heading level six anyway, but that's just kind of like a baseline rule. So if you just kind of visualize the heading structure as like an outline of information. Now this document here, it does have some headings. It's relatively simple. And you can kind of like, in a lot of cases, you can kind of like use the font style to help you because, you usually your font style, if it's coming from like a templatized document where you have like a specific style guide of how you've built it, um, you can, look for like the consistency within the font styles to help you build out that heading structure. That's not, there's always exceptions to that. I don't want to say that's like a hard and fast rule that will always apply because people design documents differently. So sometimes you just insert a new font because you think it looks cool. Or sometimes people will skip font levels because they don't like the way it aesthetically looks. So you can't entirely rely on that concept, but in a lot of ways, it's like a good starting point. As far as heading structure rules go, the first and most important rule is that your document, your PDF document, has a heading level one, and it is always the first heading in the document. There's no exceptions to that. You can't start with a heading level three just because you feel like it. You have to start your heading structure with an H1, and this document is no exception. I will call this element here a heading level one. So I simply click on it, like click on the zone itself. And over here where it says type, there's a drop down menu where I can scroll down and find heading, but I don't really like to mess around with drop down menus and scrolling so much. So when I want to set a heading level one, I literally just have to tap one on my keyboard. When you tap one on your keyboard, it becomes a heading level one. This element here is like defining another section of the document. So it's nested underneath this heading level one. So I'm going to call this a heading level two. And again, you can use the drop down menu if you want, but if you remember the keyboard shortcut, I just have to tap two on my keyboard and it becomes a heading level two. So whatever number you tap will set the corresponding heading level for that element. These three headings here, they're, in my opinion, nested inside of this heading level two. And again, they're using kind of like the same font characteristic. So I'm just going to tap three on my keyboard as I select those zones. And when I go to my preview, what I'll see is I get this increased font size to just visually confirm that those elements have all been set up as headings. Now, don't worry about like the aesthetics of the HTML. We're not like replacing your fonts and your colors or anything like that. This is purely for like validation purposes so that instead of having to interact with the tag tree in Adobe Acrobat, which is very tedious, very technical, very slow, you're just able to use this to kind of use your own common sense to like confirm that, all right, this if this is how this page is read through the screen reader, then it's going to be a good experience for that end user, and then you can move on to the next page. But if I look closely at my HTML, there is one glaring issue here. You can probably see that I have back-to-back headings of the same level. So H3 directly followed by another H3. This is breaking another rule of heading structure. With headings, you can have, let's say you have like a heading level 1 directly followed by a heading level 2. That's okay because it's properly nested. So you're dropping down a level, and that's totally fine. But if you have back-to-back headings of the same level, there needs to be some sort of content in between. You need to have a paragraph or an image or a list or a table or something. There must be some reason why that got set as an H3. Well, it's just a reading order issue, as we kind of already alluded to before. When we looked at the reading order of the page, we're still sitting at this like one column approach. And the logic of it is that Equidox just kind of scans the page left to right, top to bottom. And every time it intersects with a new zone, it will just label that next in the reading order sequence. So again, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4. Pretty straightforward. But then you get down here and it's still thinking that this is a one column page. So it goes 7, 8, 9, and 10. And you see the evidence of that in your preview. So all I have to do here is just change my reading order from 1 to 2 columns and press reorder. And it happens instantly. But when you go back to your preview, now you have your H3 directly followed by the corresponding paragraph. The way that that works is that Equidox kind of splits the page down the middle with like an invisible line. And everything that's left of that line in the middle of the page will get labeled first. And then it will finish up over on the right half. So any of the zones that didn't make it into the reading order from the left half, they will finish up. So since these zones were like straddling the left column, they were already found in the reading order. So they remain unaffected by that 2-column split. So now we have the correct reading order for the page, and this looks a heck of a lot better than when we started. All of the headings are there. The reading order is correct. All of the paragraphs are totally fine. So we could, in theory, move on to the next page. There are a couple of other like minor things that I like to mention on this page, but are there any questions on those two concepts so far with headings or reading order?
I have a question.
Sure.
Is using the 2-column layout preferable to manually updating the order in the left-hand panel? Is there a best practice approach, one better than the other, or just use case needs?
So I like to I kind of like to like funnel it down. So I start by casting the widest net possible. I usually approach it by setting my reading order at the page level and then making small adjustments from there if necessary. A lot of pages will be fine with like a full page reorder because the layout just kind of like cooperates with that concept. But if you have pages that have, more like unorthodox layouts where it's like a serpentining reading order, or you have a flow chart that has like some very specific reading order that you want to set, where like the layout of the page is just not going to cooperate with any of these 4 options, that's when you can grab like an individual zone and you can reorder it in the left-hand panel. Now this is getting a little bit advanced, but just to mention, like you don't have to like reorder every zone on the page. Now I'm just going to use like this zone down here just for example's sake. This is reading zone 11. Let's just pretend that I want reading zone 11 to be read like second on the page. So I want it to come after 1 but before 2. You might think like, all right, well, to make this be read second, I got to change 11 to 2. And then I got to come up here and I got to change 2 to 3 and then 3 to 4 and then 4 to 5 and play like musical chairs with every zone on the page. But I don't have to do that. I can just take this one zone that's out of order from where I want the reading order to be set, and I can just use the decimal system. So I can just change it from 11 to 1.1. And then it will leapfrog to the spot in the reading order where I want it to be without having that cascading effect of like shuffling everything else around just to make room for that one element that happened to be out of order due to the layout of the page. So just keep that little trick in mind, the decimal system. You don't have to like shuffle everything just because one zone is out of order.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. The other two things that I want to briefly mention about this page before we move on, the concept of artifacting. It's kind of a misconception in the PDF world to like, no matter what you have on every page, you have to tag it. That's not exactly true. You can also mark things as an artifact or marking it as decorative if you're coming from like a Microsoft background. But basically what artifacting does is it just tells the screen reader to just keep it moving, like pass right over that element. And the reason you might do that is just for like providing a more like streamlined experience for that screen reader user. So I think of like, headers and footers or like repetitive logos. You might have like an ASU logo on the bottom left corner of every single page. You might like tag it one time with like a description that says ASU logo, but you don't want to like have to type out that alt text, and a screen reader user doesn't want to hear ASU logo for 200 pages in a row. It's completely redundant. Now, if you're ever in doubt about tagging something, like throw a tag on it just to be safe. But when you have like completely redundant headers and footers or things that are just kind of like there to take up space on the page, you can mark them as an artifact. And the way that you would do that is, let's just use this header, for example. This header, if you just look at the content of it, the document title is Equidox PDF training sample file. The header is sample document created for Equidox training. The heading level 1 is PDF sample document for Equidox training. This just feels like overkill, right? Like if they're going to get the point. This is just fluff. It's just it's slowing them down. It's like a speed bump in their experience of reading this document. So you can take this zone and you can either hit like the remove zone button or keyboard shortcut it and just hit backspace on your keyboard. That zone will disappear. And if you were to go back to the HTML preview, you'll notice that footer or that header information is no longer included. The other element to mention about artifacting is something like a page number. Page numbers are meant. They're honestly PDFs. PDF is a print format. It's 30 plus years old. It's meant for like creating something that is going to print out of any printer in the world, and it's always going to look the same. If you open it up on a cell phone or a 40-inch monitor, it's going to look the same. But it was primarily a print-based format. And these page labels are a very common like design tool, because if you were to print out a 200-page document and someone says, in a boardroom meeting, like, hey, we're looking at page 152, you don't have to sit there and count to 152, go page by page. You can just thumb through like the bottom corner of the document and plop your document open at page 152. But in the digital world, these really serve no purpose at all, because like, first of all, a PDF reader, any PDF reader, just like the Chrome browser reader, you have the ability to navigate page to page or tell it like, take me to page 152, and it will take you there. A screen reader knows what page it's on. A screen reader has the ability to travel to a different page. There's commands built into the technology for that. And actually, like page labels like this, they often get desynchronized from the actual structure of the PDF, because you have like a cover page and you have a dedication page and you have a letter from the president, and then there's a 3-page table of contents, and page 1, like whatever gets labeled as page 1, is actually like page 13 in the PDF itself. So like these things can just be kind of misleading. And actually, if you look at the last line of this paragraph here, I did this on purpose, but it happens more often than you think. But like I'm referencing section 1 period, 10 period, 32 period. And then that 1 would be read directly after that like last sequence of numbers there. So when you're hearing this through a screen reader, it would be very easy for your ear to just conflate that sequence of numbers with that page number because you just heard all of those numbers in a row. So this is really just a point of confusion more than anything. Now you can hit backspace on your keyboard, you can hit the remove zone button, but just to show you another little trick, I can create a zone that's like kind of small and discrete, and it just needs to intersect with that area of the page. I can then hit I on my keyboard, I for ignore. And what the ignore zone does, it's the same thing as like artifacting the zone. So if I were to go back to my preview just after creating that ignore zone, the page number is gone. So it's been marked as an artifact. But here's the cool thing about the ignore zone. If I were to save the page, or I can mark it validated because I'm done with it, I can jump to the next page and there's my ignore zone waiting for me. So I don't have to worry about like scrolling to the bottom corner of the page on every single one and remembering to mark that page number or any repetitive element that's in like that fixed location as a, I don't have to remember to do that on every page. So a 2-page document, yeah, no big deal. I'm saving myself 2 seconds. But if it's 200 pages, 2 seconds per page really adds up at the end of the day. Be careful of your ignore zones, though. They're not really appropriate on every document. You know, don't like get carried away with it. Don't create ignore zones that are this large because it might be fine on the page that you're currently looking at, but you could be getting to like subsequent pages and like disrupting things that you weren't even aware of because you weren't looking at that page currently. So keep your ignore zones kind of discrete and out of the way, and then you won't have any issues. So they should almost always be like in the extreme margins of the page if you're going to use them at all. Real quick, I marked page 1 as validated. There's like a check mark that you can hit, which I'll show you on page 2. But when you mark a page validated, it's a great like communication tool to remind yourself or other users that this page is finished. So let's say you're working on a really long document. Chances are you're not going to like just sit down and just, you know, clear your calendar and just grind away at that document in one sitting. You might pick it apart, you know, 20 minutes at a time whenever you have, you know, some free time between meetings. And you might take, you know, a 2-week break from it. You might go on vacation, whatever might happen, or someone else might jump into that document and do 30 pages for you. When you're marking pages as validated, it just kind of removes the ambiguity of like, is this page done or did I skip it or did someone else work on it? Is it half complete? Like, where did I leave off? You don't have to start every remediation session by just like aimlessly clicking through a document, trying to remember what's finished and what got skipped. So it's a good habit to be in to kind of mark a page as done. So that way, when you jump back into it later on, you're not confused. You're not wasting time just like looking for wherever you left off. Here on page 2.
We have a couple questions. Do you want me to hold off till the end? Or?
Oh, totally fine.
Okay. Okay, so first we had when would you use the site, div, field, and anchor zone types?
Okay. Some of those are HTML properties. So just so you're aware, Equidox was originally, like this is going back like almost more than a decade at this point. Equidox was originally a PDF to HTML conversion tool. After a couple of years of being exclusively a tool to convert PDFs into HTML, we introduced the PDF export. So you could keep your document within that PDF format and export an accessible version of that PDF document. But some of the HTML properties are still in Equidox as like an active tool set because we do have customers that use Equidox for HTML to PDF to HTML conversion. So different zone types, some of them, like if you look at like anchor, block quote, site, field, OCR, quote. Some of these are HTML only. In the PDF world, you're going to primarily focus on, of course, like text is like your main one. You'll have tables. You'll have tables of contents. I'll mention like I can show you what sensitivity does. It's kind of like the slider up here, but it's meant to just be a slider for like a small section of a page without disrupting everything else. List, link, ignore, we already talked about. Heading, graphic, footnote, and footnote link. And those are like going to be your primary zones that you're going to use. Some of these other ones, they're meant for HTML purposes in the event that you do have a document that you want to convert into like a simple HTML web page. So don't get too hung up on some of these if you're planning on exporting back to a PDF. Some of these don't really have like an appropriate tag type to convert into because they are exclusively meant for like use within the PDF or within HTML.
Great, thank
Okay.
you. And you kind of gave away a little bit there that you can also um, convert to HTML with this. So
Yes, you can.
that's
Or EPUB. So EPUB is a derivative of HTML anyway, but if you have like a specific student that like prefers like an EPUB format or something, you can, export a textbook or an article or something in an EPUB format if that's what they prefer. If they don't like to use PDFs, some students, they have a specific need, or yeah, if you want to like take old archival documents and just convert them into simplified HTML, because HTML, just from an accessibility standpoint, HTML is just far superior from like for how it's used. PDFs, it's a very old kind of archaic format that the entire world relies on. We have literally trillions with a T, trillions of PDFs floating around. Virtually none of them are accessible. Like we're
most of
talking,
them at ASU.
we're talking about like less than 10% of them are accessible. But there's trillions of them floating around. So it's a format that we so heavily rely on. They're not natively accessible. The format itself is 30 years old. It doesn't go through a whole lot of like overhaul or kind of enhancement to make it more accessible. And now we're trying to like retroactively correct these mountains of documents that have been piling up for years upon years. And so that's part of the challenge of PDF accessibility. It's the reason why a tool like Equidox exists. Okay, with this page here, unless there was any other questions.
There
Okay.
was one, but I was going to, if someone's using a screen reader is create, so if you've got reference citations, how do you make sure that people with vision can get to that reference? And I was going to say it's just, with your PDF reader, we'll just go to that page for you.
Hmm.
It'll
Yeah,
usually,
it's almost like a hyperlink in that type of way.
yeah. Does that make sense, Kenna?
I, I thank you for asking. I'm probably missing something. I'm just wondering if we are skipping, I forget the word you used, ignoring, I think, the page numbers in the PDF. Those are usually the published page numbers of the publication. So I'm just curious how it works with reference citations with someone when someone's using a screen reader to write a research paper. How do they make sure if we're ignoring those page numbers in the document, how do we make sure that they're using the right reference page, page number?
Because the screen reader will tell them what page they're on. And if it's someone with vision, they're going to be using a PDF reader piece of software to
Hmm.
read the PDF, and that will tell them, that will chunk it into pages and tell them what page they're on.
So say it's like a journal article that starts on page 13 of
Mhm.
a journal. So the PDF starts on page 13. Would the screen reader know that and the person using the screen reader know that? Or would it start at page one?
Oh, I see what you mean. If the page numbers are out of order, like
Yeah,
you pulled a chapter out of a book and made it a
right.
PDF.
Like that. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. Dan, you have an answer for that? I don't.
Well, there's limitations here to what PDFs are capable of. If you have, if what's labeled as page 13 is actually page one of a PDF, there's going to be like a layer of confusion there just in general, because they're going to be hearing like 13 when they know that they're only on page one. Now, like these are just things that kind of have to be like worked around, I suppose. Like you can but like the structure of the document changes. It's no longer page 13 of an article. It's now page 1 of this PDF because someone chose to extract that article and turn it into its own isolated PDF.
Okay. So so I'm not imagining that it might be an issue. That's helpful. Thank you.
I mean, there are like there's no doubt that there's like accessibility challenges with PDFs. Like you just at some point you just have to do the best you can, because what we're doing is taking something that is completely unusable and we are doing our best to make it as usable as possible. Some documents we can make flawless. Other documents you can make compliant and accessible, but with the understanding that there's limitations to what a PDF document can do functionally. Like take like a map, for example. People ask me all the time, how do I remediate a map? Well, like you just call it an image and you say that this is, a map of the ASU campus and you move on with your day, because a blind user is not going to be using that PDF document to like try to navigate from the library to the cafeteria. It's not meant for that purpose. It's in a perfect world, we'd have like a three-dimensional textile map where you could actually put your hands on it and they would be able to feel like the points of interest, and it would have braille pop-up displays and things like that. But this is just a two-dimensional PDF document that we have to just do the best we can within like the boundaries of what PDF tagging can actually be.
I don't know about anybody else, but stuff like this particular question, when I hear stuff like this, it's like it makes me feel a lot better because it makes me realize that I can never be 100% accessible. All I can do is be better. I mean, there's always going to be something out there that I'm not going to be able to foresee, or, some assistive technology that I am not going to, my stuff isn't going to be compatible with. I mean, it kind of makes me relax a little bit about accessibility and not worry so much that, oh, I've got to catch every single little thing, because that's kind of impossible.
Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Because yeah, I mean you can always find you can always find something where you can make an argument it should have been tagged differently, and someone might argue a different way and say no, it should have been tagged this way. The point is that you've made an effort and you're providing this information in a format that can actually be read. Because if we're not going through any of this, then you're just telling a screen reader user that, hey, here's a 2-page PDF document and none of the content can be read to them. And so that's the alternative. And like, yeah, you might think like, well, no, we shouldn't be artifacting this header. And I might say, yes, we should be artifacting this header. Both of us could be considered right or wrong. And it's like more of like open for interpretation. Some of this is just like, doing the best we can, making our own like choices as the content authors or as managing the content. Not everyone is going to have the exact same vision of how this information should be read or what the reading order should be. But the point is that we're making an effort and we are open to the idea of like if a blind student or a prospective student or a parent of a student calls into the office and says, hey, I need help with this document. It's just not reading correctly. It's not accessible. It's not compatible with my assistive technology. And we're giving them we're listening to them and we're taking them seriously and we're making an effort to accommodate them rather than just having a bunch of untagged stuff that no one can interact with, that no one can read if you're using any form of assistive technology. So yeah, I mean, it's like PDFs are challenging and there's a lot to this. I would say like we're always striving for perfection, but realizing that perfection is like a very fluid thing in the PDF world. There's so many variables at play here, and rather than spending hours upon hours trying to make one document perfect, it's like let's get through this document, make it as good as we can within reason, and then let's spend the other couple of hours that we were going to spend on making a dozen more documents accessible.
I love that. That's really that's the spirit, I think, of accessibility, is to make things as accessible to as many people with disabilities as we can. We are actually over time right now. I don't know, Dan, do you have something going on after this, or can you stick
Um,
around?
I have a few more minutes. I can hang out. I was just gonna go through a few more things. We're
Okay.
definitely, yeah. So
So if you
we'll
guys
finish
have
up
to
this
jump, go
document.
ahead. This is being recorded and I will post it. I'll try and get it up next week. Otherwise, if you have a few more minutes, stick around with us.
We'll go a little quicker on this page because it's kind of review for these top items at least. So I'm just gonna artifact my
Oh,
header with
I'm
backspace.
sorry, Dan.
Oh,
I got one more question. People want to know if they can email you with specific questions.
so there is like a support portal process that's being established with ASU. Um, in the initial stages, like we are sort of like finalizing like the support workflow. We're trying to figure out who ASU is choosing to whitelist as like the support users. So there is going to be like a more formal process for support. With individual questions, like if if within reason, I can answer them. If it's just like every hour of every day, I'm being asked like, how do I import a document or how do I move, like, how do I do this again? I'm just not going to have time to be able to field all those questions because you will have a campus-wide license. So there's literally going to be thousands of users, and I'm just one person. So there is going to be a formal support process with internal ASU staff for support. And so that is being established right now. So you can email me like some questions here, like out of the gate, but soon there will be like a formal process to address those types of questions.
Yeah, keep your eye on that page on the accessibility site, the Equidox page. There is a link there to ask questions, so use that form. And then pretty soon there'll be a more formal or official setup for getting support. Um, so great. Okay. Thank you, Dan. I think we'll try not to bother you with. You have lots of other schools that you need to be training too.
Yeah. No problem though. I understand this can be like a challenge at first, so I'm happy that you are all interested to actually learn to do this the proper way instead of just avoiding it because that's what a lot of people do. They go, oh, I don't want to do this at all. This shouldn't be my responsibility. But it's like, hey, if you want to use PDFs, you got to make them accessible. It's not my call. Take it up with the DOJ. So we will set this as an H2 by tapping 2. This zone here, if you notice, like this is a thing that maybe you make a little design flaw. You forgot to put a carriage return after the heading level 2. I might have been able to solve this with my slider, but I'm also able to just like grab the border of the zone and just move it up and then draw a new zone here to just like recapture that text. So now I'm able to kind of like break that out. So I'm able to move that into a heading level 2 zone and then have another paragraph zone here, text zone that is going to capture that paragraph. Now, when I go to my preview, what I'll find is that my reading order is off. The reason why is when I deleted my header up here, the zone 1 on the page, and then I drew this new zone down here, this just took over reading zone number 1. So just hit the reorder button and all will be well. You'll go back to your preview and now your paragraph is going to be following the heading level 2 where it belongs. There's 2 images on this page, and images are a very common thing to find inside of PDF documents, of course. Now, I would argue that both of these images are just kind of pointless. I just grabbed like the first result on Google Images for lorem ipsum, and then I put our logo in here. Neither of these are very important. They're not really like adding a lot of value to the document. You might elect to artifact them. Now, you can do this a number of ways. If you go to the page tab allows you to make changes at the page level. Like there's some settings here, and you can even apply settings to all pages if you'd like. But one of the check boxes says images. If you deselect that, all of the images on the page will disappear, not visually, but the zones of like that sit on top of them will disappear. And as you would probably expect, when you go to your preview, you no longer have those images there. They will be marked as an artifact. So you're not responsible for providing alt text. Now, it's not always going to be like a one size fits all artifact every image on the page type of approach. Maybe you just want to artifact one of the images on the page. Well, you can just click on it and hit backspace on your keyboard. And then as you would expect, just the Equidox logo is going to appear in your HTML preview. And a good like rule of thumb is if you have an image that you see appearing in the HTML preview, make sure you come over here to the description field and type in a description. So the description for this would just be as simple as just like Equidox logo, making sure that you're not leaving that blank. We could have a full hour discussion about how to write alt text. There's tons of resources available on that for more like self-paced learning, but you don't need to be so verbose in your alt text, especially when you're dealing with like logos. I don't need to say that like every letter is capitalized and the O in Equidox is like a baby blue with like a PDF document with a check mark on it inside of the O. And you don't have to be like that, like descriptive. All you really need to do is kind of just, what are you deriving from it as a sighted user, and just, convert it into a simple description of it. Okay, so this page, here's that validate check mark. So if I feel like I'm done with the page, I hit validate. And then if I back out of the document detail page, you can see both pages are now marked validated. Like to finish off the process, I typically go to the export tab right here. You can hit the export to PDF button if you want, but when you open up the full export tab, you have some different options. One of the options is PDF. You don't have to rename it anything. You can just, if you leave this file name field blank, it will just export as is, and it will take the old file name, like the original one that came in with the document. And so that way you don't have, if you're like doing like a find and replace on like your CMS or your LMS, you might need to have like the identical file name for that find and replace to work. So most people don't even want to change their file names. So you just hit generate PDF. And when you do, it's going to export this new version of the document. And now it's like rendering here in my browser. So it's in my little Adobe Reader. And if I were to download this version of the document, I'll put this one on my desktop. Here's my new PDF. And when you open this one up, if you go to the tag panel, you'll see that all of the content is now tagged. So just like we saw in Equidox, now we have like a tagged rendering of that exact same HTML preview. But I don't have to like manipulate all of these complicated tags and little carets and expand and collapse them. Equidox did the hard part of writing all of this tag structure for me. But if you want to like tab through it, you're more than welcome to. It starts with the heading level 1, and then it moves into an H2, and then a P tag, and then an H3, P tag, another H3, another P tag. And there's our reading orders, making sure it goes following the 2 columns. You get down here, you have an H2 and a P tag, another H2, P tag. And then there's your Equidox logo with the Equidox logo description that you typed in. And if you run the accessibility checker, which again, some of you may do, some of you may not use Acrobat at all. The only 2 warnings that you will get are for reading order and color contrast. Don't panic with these. These are unavoidable. They come out with every document, no matter what. They are not failures. They are just reminders that Acrobat is incapable of telling you what the reading order of a document should be. So it's reminding you to check that manually. Of course, we have checked that twice over at this point, so we know that the reading order is correct. And also the color contrast. There's really no good way of fixing color contrast in a PDF document. You really need to consider that at the design level. You do not want to be in a position where you're trying to like manipulate the content of a PDF. That's like the exact opposite of what the PDF format was invented for, so that you can't make visual alterations to it. So I would say, like, just from like a policy perspective, it's one of those things where, like, if you've got a 15-year-old PDF document and you have no idea where the source file is, you have no method of like, making a correction to the InDesign file or to the Word document, like it's just a lost document that's on a hard drive in a landfill somewhere, and you just got a PDF version of it, you almost have to just like say like, hey, we tried our best. Like it's as accessible as it's going to get. It's tagged correctly. It will work with assistive technology, but there might be a few contrast issues with fonts on top of background colors. There's very little that you can do about that within reason, but it's something to consider with like all documents moving forward. Take your templates and run them through in a contrast checker, and make sure that you're not using fonts and background colors that are going to clash in terms of the contrast. So once you've got like those templates established, then you know that, okay, every document I ever produce out of these templates is not going to have contrast issues because I've chosen the appropriate like style. The style guide and the color palette that I'm using is going to work. But yeah, if we're talking about, thousands of old documents where you don't have the source file, no reasonable way to edit it, it's kind of water under the bridge. I wouldn't recommend going down the path of trying to change contrast in a PDF document. You will break more documents than you'll fix. So real quick, I know that we're way over time here. I just wanted to mention like documents that have different element types, not just text and headings and like a simple image. So something like this, moving my slider is like a good place to start. Just for consistency, I'll set some headings just so that I have them, like kind of, a decent heading structure here in place. This document has a list on it. So if you were to just look at your preview, the way it's currently set up, that list doesn't look quite right at all. It's just kind of like a weird run-on sentence. And so lists have a specific way that they need to be read. Every list item needs to be like kind of isolated, but they all need to be grouped together as a list. Now, right now, because there was no tag structure, this is just like a block of text as far as a machine is concerned. But I can hit L on my keyboard, L for list, of course, and it will slide you down to the list detector. You can also change the zone to a list in the drop-down menu if you prefer. So that's, another thing that a lot of people do. But then you have this list detector where if you just nudge this slider from left to right, it will automatically locate the list items for you. So when you go back to your preview, instead of having just like some weird run-on sentence, you now have a list that is delineated by these 5 bullet points. So you don't have to worry about anything else. You're just kind of calling this a list by hitting L and nudging the slider. There are some other list detection settings, primarily used for like nested lists where you would have like a list within a list. So these other settings use artificial intelligence. So if you come across like, a list within a list item that's part of a larger list, you might try using these other settings and the artificial intelligence will locate those list items for you. So this is just a basic list though, where you just have like bullet points. So in general, you just need like the first setting level and it will know exactly where to put those grid lines to create the list for you. This is a table. And as you can probably tell, it looks a little funny. We have like every column kind of like on its own. And when you look at the preview, you get exactly as you would expect. Now, this is a good visualization where your own, even if you're like brand new to accessibility and you don't know anything about PDFs, and this is all just kind of like very foreign to you, your own like common sense should kick in and go like, hey, if this is what's read out loud through a screen reader, then that is just a bunch of nonsense. There is not a human in the world that would know what this is referring to. It's just a bunch of crazy numbers following each other. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's completely random. You would never know what that 153 is in reference to. It would be absolutely impossible to figure that out. So what we do to fix this is just take like a zone that's already there, or you can draw a new one if you want, it doesn't really matter, and just put it on top of the entire table. When you put the zone on top of the entire table, you can hit T on your keyboard, or you can change it to a table in the drop-down menu if you prefer, whatever you'd like, it doesn't really matter. Once it's a table, you can then double click on it, or there's a button for the table editor. So it doesn't really matter, but I usually just double click and it will open up the table editor. Now in the table editor, there are these green grid lines here, which you can drag around if you feel like it, but it's not really necessary. We have table detection sliders. So these 2 sliders here, they're really good at picking up tables. So you pretty much just have to like wake them up. They're sleeping right now, but if you just like nudge them, look at how it just reshuffles itself. And all of the columns and rows have been identified. So you have like perfect grid lines to match the table structure. If I were to preview just the table, you'll see a pretty dramatic improvement where you have actual tabular structure here compared to whatever this is, just a wall of numbers that doesn't make any sense. There is one quick thing to fix though with this table. If you notice the faculty and the blank row header below it, staff and a blank row header, the way that this table was designed, like the row header for faculty, it's really supposed to act as a row header for both of these rows. So you never want to have like blank headers in a table, because all of these values here, all of this table data, it's all like living inside of a blank row. So there's nothing to like kind of identify what these numbers mean, because there's physically no content there. So the way to fix this, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is click in the cell where you want the span to begin, and then hold Shift on your keyboard, and then select the cell where you want the span to finish. So spanning cells is a common function in tables. It's just kind of part of it. You don't have to do it on every table, but if you need to, this is how you do it. Once you have those cells selected, there's a span button that kind of pops up here. You can press that, or you can just hit S on your keyboard. Same thing. Just hit S, and it will span. So again, holding Shift and pressing S. And now when you go back to your preview, you won't have those blank row headers anymore. Now the row headers are straddling the two rows. So all of the data in both of these rows is going to relate to the faculty row header. The bold font that you notice on like the far left column in the top row, that is an indication of table headers, whereas the standard font in the middle of the table is an indication of table data. So the table data is like a specific tag within the table tag, and a table header is a specific tag within the table tag itself. So like there's one, if you were to look at the tag structure of a table, it would just say table. And then you expand that tag, that table tag, and suddenly you have a whole bunch of new tags in there. A table row, a table row, a table row. Every single row will have its own tag. And then you expand that table row, and then there's a bunch of table data inside of it. So there's actually like 100 tags associated with this table right now. But all of the bold font is representing the cells that are going to be tagged as table headers. And then the standard font is table data. That ratio can be adjusted. Now I don't need to adjust it for this table. I'm living happy with that 1-to-1 ratio. But let's just pretend, that like 2021 here, let's just pretend that like this was subdivided by like Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. And so like you had like a second layer of column headers. Well, you would just change your column header from 1 to 2, and then your top 2 rows will then appear with that bold font to indicate that both of those rows are going to be tagged with that table header tag type. The idea being that if a user was in this cell, they would know that they're in a staff row, and then they're in a column which has 2 column headers for 2018, and in this case 103. But presumably it would be like 2018 Q3, 2018 Q4. So like they would have all of that sort of orientation within the table. So no matter what table data cell that they are currently like focused on, they're never lost. They always have those relationships of their column and row headers. So I'm going to go back to that standard 1-to-1 ratio, because that's what this table really requires. And I'll turn on my table summary. Just so you know, table summaries are not required. They're not like a hard and fast rule for compliance purposes, but they are like a nice to have. It never hurts to have one. You can provide a table summary by hitting this checkbox, and that way, Equidox will just kind of like programmatically write a summary for you. Do not spend your time trying to like turn this entire table into a paragraph. I see a lot of new users doing that. They think that they're supposed to like write all of the information in this table as just like a 2,000 word essay. That is not at all what the table summary is for. The table summary is meant to be like a roadmap, essentially, so that a screen reader user knows how complex the table is. It is not a description of the information within the table. There is no point in doing that. You're wasting your time. All of the information within this table, the way that we've tagged it here, that's what they require. So do not spend 20 minutes trying to type all of this information out in the table summary. I unfortunately see a lot of people doing that, so that's just why I caution against it. If we save the table, we can also close out of it. And then when we come back to the main PDF page, you'll notice that all those like individual zones that were there before, they are now replaced by the single table zone. So now I'm just kind of left with like a cleaner look here. I don't have all of those little zones that were kind of grouping together the columns. They've been replaced by the table zone. One other quick thing is down here, you have like 4 images stacked on top of each other, and then you have a bunch of random words. Well, this is the rendering of this bar graph down here. And how these things come to be is, it's beyond me. I don't even know where this document came from. Someone gave it to me a long time ago, but it's a pretty good example of kind of weird things that can happen in PDFs. But for some reason, whatever software this document came from, instead of creating just like one image for the entire bar chart, it gave us 4 separate images stacked on top of each other for each of the 4 variables in this bar chart. And that's why we get this weird effect over here in our HTML preview. This is a perfect example where I would just go like, I don't want any of those images. They're not helping me at all. I'm going to turn them off. Then I'm going to draw a zone around this, all of these little zones here. So like the data on like the X and Y axis, very satisfied, somewhat satisfied, neutral, it really has no purpose without like the proper context. This is data visualization, and data visualization for a blind person is really not very valuable, because a blind user cannot see like where this dark black line ends on the x-axis to line it up with like the 50% marker down here and go, okay, it looks like it's about 52%. They don't have that luxury to like visually see all of these like location-based relationships. So all of these words, like the very satisfied, somewhat satisfied, if this is just what the screen reader is reading to them, this means nothing. This has zero context at all. So it's not helping us in that way. So what I do is I just put a zone around all of it, and I'm going to hit S on my keyboard. S is for sensitivity. And I mentioned this quickly before, but like sensitivity is essentially the same thing as this slider up here. But if I were to move the slider that kind of like comes alive for just this zone, it works the same way that the sensitivity works, but it only affects this portion of the page. It doesn't disrupt everything else that's going on up here. So I'm just going to drag it to 0 to get rid of all of that extra like fluff that's in the way. And now that I've gotten rid of all those zones with kind of just dragging that to 0, I'm going to change the sensitivity zone to a graphic. You can also hit G on your keyboard, G for graphic. Now that it's a graphic, I can type in an alt description of this graphic. Now, again, writing alt text for something like this, it's kind of up to you as to how in depth you want to go. If you were to sit here and type out like every single year, every single variable, every single percentage value for each one of those, that's, probably a couple hundred words of typing. Depending on how fast you type, it might be worth it. If you're a slow typer, maybe it's just like, okay, that's a lot. I don't want to type all of that out. I think with bar charts and like scatter plots and line graphs and things like that, you just have to kind of draw the line in the sand and try to be reasonable. Like, in my opinion, if I'm looking at this like visually, I'm just kind of like, the conclusion that I'm drawing from it is that in general, most people are satisfied with the IT environment on campus. And I might just kind of boil my description down to something like that. Does anyone really need to know that in 2020, it looks like about 3% of people were somewhat dissatisfied with the IT environment? You get super granular like that, and it's just like word salad. So like a screen reader user that's hearing all of this, they are probably going to be confused by it anyway, and they're going to just like tune out and skip over it. So whatever you kind of like derive from this graph visually, that's kind of how you want to use that to guide yourself when you're writing the alt text. So type in that most people are satisfied over the last 4 years of the IT environment on campus, and then move on from there. Like the exact data that's being represented here, it's hard for me to even visually put it together. So I don't want to sit here and stare at this for 5 minutes and try to convert this into a 5-paragraph essay.
I was going to say, if it is really important that everybody know those exact numbers, you can always turn it into a table.
Mm-hmm. If it's a pie chart that has 3 slices of the pie, and each of those pie slices has like a percentage value inside of it, Sure, take 30 seconds to just type out the three variables that are being described with an exact percentage figure, because that's the experience that you're having by visually looking at it. But when you visually look at this, there's no like precise like percentages being conveyed here. And I might think that this dark black line here for very satisfied, it might be, I might think it's 51%. Someone else might think it's 53%. Like, are we going to get a ruler out here and like look at like what is the exact distance in pixels between these two grid lines for 50 and 60, and then try to measure exactly how far over it went? Like, if there were exact data that kind of populated this graph, ideally it would already be on the document, like in the form of a table. The whole point of this graph is to visualize that in general, most people are pretty satisfied. And if that's what you're drawing from it visually, that's what I would use to write my alt text. I would not spend a half an hour trying to convert this into a huge paragraph. So with that said, if I were to like preview the page, keep in mind reading order is going to be a little bit scrambled. We got rid of a bunch of zones up here that were part of that table, and then I drew this zone manually. So it jumped into reading zone 6 when I have, and I don't want it up there. It's not where it belongs. It belongs down here with its heading. So just don't forget to hit the reorder button. In general, I recommend thinking about your reading order kind of as like a final step, because as you make changes and like adjustments to the page, you might be like opening up slots in that reading order, and you might be adding new zones in that are kind of like taking over the wrong locations. So just as like a final step, it's a good habit to just make sure that you are reordering the page, or at the very least double checking the HTML preview to look for those outliers. Like, to me, it was obvious when that graphic was way up here coming after the list, that wasn't right at all. It's not where it belongs. And so I just go back and I hit the reorder button, refresh the preview, and now you can see everything is in the correct order. And with that said, I do have to get running now, but I have like 2 more minutes if there's any questions about this page.
This was fabulous. I learned so much.
Oh, I'm glad.
Thank you very much.